The rain came down in sheets. That night, Brooklyn was thick with steam. Streetlights smeared across the asphalt like the teardrops of a city that never sleeps. In the small third-floor apartment, Sarah Lawson curled up in an old armchair, eyes tired as she watched Tinchani. Each raindrop traced its path down the window pane. The wall clock ticked on, counting the breaths left of a woman clutching at a fragile thread of peace. On the table, several debt notices lay in a messy stack beside a photograph of her late father. The smile in the picture had faded, but the ache remained. He had died 2 years ago, leaving her not only with an emptiness, but with a strange pile of debts no one dared to name. She had thought she could manage work harder, save more, protect her and her son from that shadowed past. But debt does not wait. It has legs and teeth, and it was closing in. The apartment, already cold, felt even more bitter because of the rain. In the corner, Leo, a 10-year-old boy, was absorbed in a comic book under the warm yellow lamp. His brown hair was tousled, his eyes bright, and his gentle smile made Sarah both tender and fearful. He was too good, too sensible, too silent for a childhood he should have been living. "Leo, it's late. Go to sleep, honey," she said softly, voice low with fatigue. "Just this page." "Mom, when are we moving?" Sarah stopped, her heart sinking. "Soon, I think. We need a quieter place." She lied as easily as she breathed. The landlord had already served an eviction notice, and there was nowhere else to go. Outside, the rain intensified. Wind lashed against the window like a warning. And amid the night's cacophony, another sound cut through, small but sharp enough to make Sarah bolt upright. A knock, dry and insistent. Not a neighbor's knock. Not the mailman's. It was the knock of someone who knew they were dealing with fear. She signaled for Leo to be quiet. Sarah's bare feet met the cold wooden floor. Each heartbeat seemed to slide along with the rhythm of the rain. The front door trembled once, twice, and then crash, the wood splintered, as if the outside world had just stormed in. 2 men in black coats surged into the apartment. The air was sucked out of the room. One of them, large, broad-shouldered, smelling of cheap cigarettes and metal, looked around and sneered. "Sarah Lawson." His voice was hoarse, as if carved from stone. Sarah backed away, placing herself between the intruders and Leo. I don't know who you are." "No need." He pulled a paper from his coat pocket. "You owe. And Palmer wants his promise kept." She froze. Palmer, a familiar name she couldn't place. The other man had no patience. He grabbed her arm with such force her bones seemed to crack. "Come on, people like you don't ask many questions." "Let go of my mother," Leo screamed. Sarah spun panic in her eyes. "Leo, hide!" She shoved her son into the kitchen cupboard and slammed the door, only to be dragged stumbling down the hallway. The slam of the door, the rain, the thudding of hearts. Everything shattered inside the boy's head. Leo huddled in the dark, hand clamped over his mouth, trying not to cry. He heard his mother's screams, the footsteps, then the roar of an engine. And then silence. He counted the seconds. 1 minute, 5, 10. Then he stepped out, small legs trembling over splintered wood. On the table was a scrap of paper his mother had hastily written on. "If anything happens, run. Don't call the police. I love you." He knew what to do. Not the police. His mother had warned him that some bad men weren't afraid of the law. But in this neighborhood, everyone knew of one place. Even the police avoided the Palmer mansion. A 10-year-old boy in the middle of a rainy night pulled on a thin coat and ran through streets blurred by light. Rain lashed his face cold and stinging, but the only image in his mind was his mother's face and her last words. "Don't be afraid." On the other side of Brooklyn, the Palmer estate loomed, a fortress among steel and concrete. 7-meter-high iron gates, guards in black raincoats standing motionless, security lights sweeping like lightning. Inside, rows of luxury cars sat silent like a pride of sleeping beasts. Austin Palmer sat in his private conference room, a glass of whiskey in hand, eyes fixed on a map of the docks. "Take Don Verratti out before next week," he said, voice low, cold, unwavering. A henchman nodded and took notes. No one in the room dared meet his gaze, those steel gray eyes that had made many beg for their lives. Boss, a guard, burst in, breathless with fear. "There's a kid at the gate. Says he urgently needs to see you." Austin looked up, frowning. "Tonight, yes. He's soaked to the bone." He said, "Bad men took my mama." Silence fell like a blade. Austin set his glass down. "Bring him in." Leo stood at the gate, trembling. Rain soaked through his coat, but his eyes burned with an odd, resolute light. When the door opened, the interior light revealed the handsome but cold face of the man the neighborhood only mentioned in whispers: Austin Palmer. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dangerous handsomeness framed by an expression like a drawn blade. "Who are you?" he asked, voice low and hoarse but curious. Leo lifted his chin, biting his lip. "Bad men took my mom. They said she owed you." Austin's brow lifted. A faint, cold smile flickered across his face. "I don't take women, nor mothers of children." He crouched, his gaze softening for a moment. "What's your name, Leo Lawson?" The name hit Austin like an echo from a long-buried past he thought he'd left behind. He stood, voice lowering, deliberate. "My rule is to stay out of other people's business. But tonight, I break the rule." He turned to his guards. "Ready a car. Find a woman named Sarah Lawson." "Who does she owe? I want answers within an hour." The boy looked up, tearful. "You'll help my mom, right?" Austin placed a hand on his shoulder. His gaze was the eye of a coming storm. "I don't help people. I return to them what was never theirs." He turned away, voice like thunder. "But anyone who dares lay a hand on a child, I'll make them disappear from the map of Brooklyn." The rain would not stop. Lightning tore across the sky like a warning. A child had just awakened a sleeping beast in the dark, the beast named Austin Palmer. Sarah Lawson did not yet know that tonight, as she was dragged away in terror, her late father's debts had by accident called the name of a man who had been her past and was about to become her fate. If you believe a meeting between darkness and light can change a life, stay with us. Part 2 will show you not everyone who comes out of hell has lost the capacity to love. The rain had eased, but the chill still clung to every breath. As the convoy of black cars sped through the suburban streets, headlights picked out the slick roads like glittering scars of the city. Austin Palmer sat in the back seat, silent. His face was reflected in the glass, half light and half shadow, as if he too were trapped between two worlds, one of power and blood, the other of memory and pain. In front of him, the boy Leo slept from exhaustion. His hair was plastered wet to his head, and his small hand still clutched the photograph of his mother. The paper's edge blurred with water, yet the woman's smile in the photo remained bright. Austin stared for a long moment, then looked away. Something in his chest stirred, faint but persistent, a feeling he believed he had buried years ago: responsibility. "Boss Daniel," his most loyal driver said through the rearview mirror, "we traced the signal. A Russian crew is holding a woman at the southern docks. Looks like it's the right place." Austin closed his eyes. "Prepare the team. Quietly. No negotiations." Daniel understood and nodded. In Austin's world, no negotiations meant no survivors. Across the city, Sarah Lawson woke in a damp room. Her wrists were bound. Both temples throbbed, as if 1,000 pins had been driven in. The single bare bulb overhead cast weak, merciless light. The smell of rust mixed with mildew made her nauseous. Nearby, a man sat smoking, looking at her with the bored indifference of someone accustomed to other people's fear. "You awake?" he asked. Sarah swallowed, voice hoarse. "What do you want?" "Money." "I don't have any. Not money." He laughed, a sound like glass striking metal. "We want your mind. I hear you're a very good psychologist. My boss needs you to analyze someone. Then you can go, if you cooperate." She stared at him without blinking. There was no obedience in her eyes, only calculation. "And if I refuse?" she asked. He drew on his cigarette, exhaled a cloud of murky smoke. "Then your son will no longer have a mother." Sarah held her breath. Her heart tightened, but her lips kept a thin, blade-like smile. "Your boss should know threatening a psychologist won't work. I've taught killers how to notice when they're about to lose control. You're shaking, aren't you? Not because of me, but because of your boss." The man's brow nodded. She knew she'd hit a nerve. Meanwhile, Austin's convoy stopped in front of an abandoned warehouse at the Brooklyn docks. A failing neon sign flickered its reflection, trembling on pooled water and turning the waterfront into a warped painting. Austin stepped out. No raincoat, no cover. Rain dotted his black suit with dark patches, but he paid it no mind. Report. 4 guards, 2 flanking. A black truck parked behind. Movement inside high chance Ms. Lawson is alive, Daniel reported in a low voice. Austin nodded. 10 minutes. Go in clear. It leave no trace. He drew his handgun himself, a silver SIG with the initials VP, engraved on the grip, the only memento from the father he once hated. As he racked the slide, a faint, bitter smile touched his face. Sarah Lawson. He had never forgotten that name. She was the last summer of his childhood on Long Island, the brown-haired girl who laughed and listened. He remembered her eyes when he had said, "I hate my family, Sarah. They want me to become a monster." And she had smiled softly, "Then don't let them make you one." But one day she disappeared. Her family moved away. He returned to Rome and began a path that would make him into a true monster. 18 years passed, and now that monster was coming to save her. Gunfire cracked as Austin's team stormed the place. Bullets shredded the night. Bodies crumpled like marionettes with severed strings. There were no screams, only the cold metallic cadence of violence, neat and precise like a pre-composed score. Austin entered with steady weapon in hand, yet his heart clenched when the last door swung open. There she sat, pale eyes, wide wrists swollen from the ropes. But the moment their gazes met, the world seemed to stop. She did not recognize him. He recognized her immediately. Dim light fell across her face, revealing the green eyes he had dreamed of through the long years. Sarah, the girl who once made him want to be a decent man. "You all right?" he asked, voice low and strange yet authoritative. Sarah recoiled instinctively, scanning him head to toe. There was nothing saintly about him. "Who are you?" she demanded. "The man here to collect a debt. You, one of them?" "No." He crouched, cutting the ropes, his hand brushing her wrist, warm, strong, and oddly safe. "I've come to end this." Before she could ask more, gunfire erupted again. Austin spun, shoved her to the floor, and used his body as a shield. The sense of gunpowder rain and the man's skin braided into something heady that blurred Sarah's sense of fear and pulse. When the silence returned, he stood voice hoarse. "They're all dead. Now go." She hesitated. "Who are you really?" Austin did not turn. He only said softly, "The one who once owed you a promise." On the way back, Sarah sat in the car stunned. She could not stop thinking about the man beside her, his cold eyes, the gravel in his voice, the way he killed without hesitation, and the hands that had carried her out of hell. Austin said nothing. He stared ahead. His features were carved into the shifting light of the street lamps. There was something in that silence that choked her, not from fear, but from curiosity. She turned to study his profile, the firm jaw, the faint scar along his neck, like the remnant of a life in shadow. "What do you do?" she asked quietly. "I protect what matters to me." "By killing people." He smiled without answering. When the car stopped before the towering iron gates, Sarah held her breath. The mansion loomed like a fortress in the night. Yellow light washing the cold stone. Leo leapt from the car shouting, "Mom!" Sarah rushed into his arms and wept without restraint. Austin watched from a short distance. His face was impassive, but the look in his eyes betrayed a rare softness. For a moment, Sarah looked up at him grateful but bewildered. She wanted to ask who he was, how he knew her name, why he had saved her, but the question never formed. He had already turned away. "You and your son will stay here, temporarily." "No, I have to go." "There's nowhere to go." He said it as if it were obvious. "Your home was burned. I had my people put the fire out. You and the boy are lucky to be alive, Sarah." Her blood froze at the name he used. "How do you know my name?" she asked. He looked at her, a strange light in his eyes, part tenderness, part ferocity. Because I was the first to call that name. Sarah stood motionless. The words cut like a blade through foggy memory. A fragment flashed Long Island shore, a dark-haired boy drawing in the sand, promising with a smile. If I grow up, I'll protect you. She exhaled, and Austin had already turned away. That night, while the two of them slept in an unfamiliar, luxurious room, Austin stood alone on the second-floor balcony. The rain had stopped, but a cold veil still lay over the city. Below, guards were changing shift. Patrol lights swept across the wet grounds. He pulled from his pocket a small, worn photograph. 3 children on a beach, one of them the brown-haired girl smiling brightly. On the back, a child's trembling handwriting read, "For Austin, the friend who isn't afraid of waves." A gust carried the distant tang of the sea. He closed his eyes and murmured to himself, "I'm no longer that boy, Sarah. But perhaps I still owe you an unfinished promise." Below, Leo shifted in his sleep and unconsciously held his mother's hand tight. Above the man stood motionless in the yellow light, eyes cold as glass reflecting a city where even devils feel pain, and where darkness was beginning to stir at the sound of a name once thought forgotten. Mornings at the Palmer mansion came without radiant dawn, only pale light seeping through thick curtains, soft yet cold. The room where Sarah woke was filled with the fragrance of sandalwood and mint, a quiet luxury so intense it felt suffocating. Her sleep had been no rest at all, just a fracture, an escape from one nightmare into another, beautiful, surreal, a gilded prison. Leo was still asleep, his small face pressed against the white pillow, breathing evenly. He looked strangely peaceful, as if the horrors of the night before had been nothing but a dream. Sarah brushed his hair gently, her chest tightening. Part of her wanted to wake him and run anywhere as long as it was away from here. But another part, colder and more rational, knew the truth. Leaving Palmer Mansion now would be suicide. She pulled on a thin sweater and stepped into the hall. It stretched long and narrow, lined with gray stone walls and muted lights that glowed like those in a museum. Everything was so still she could hear her own heartbeat. A man waited at the end of the corridor. He wore a black suit, tall, with a face carved in calm composure. But when he bowed slightly, his voice was polite. "Mrs. Lawson, Mr. Palmer would like to see you. In his east study." "He wants to see me. Now." "Yes, ma'am." "He doesn't like to wait." Sarah nodded faintly and followed. She wasn't afraid, or at least she refused to look it. She needed to keep her mind steady, as she always did when facing unstable patients. But this man wasn't a patient. He was the one who had saved her by killing 10 others. The study door opened with the weight of a secret. It was spacious, lit by warm light from a large window gleaming off walnut wood and floor-to-ceiling shelves. Austin Palmer stood by the window, sleeves rolled up, hands in his pockets, gazing into the garden. Morning sunlight caught his dark brown hair, a little tousled, making him look almost human, less cold than the night before. Sarah froze in the doorway. For a brief moment, she didn't know what to say. He turned, eyes the same as ever, deep, cool, and unreadable as the surface of a midnight lake. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "I'm not sure. I've never slept somewhere with armed guards outside my door." He smiled faintly, not mockingly. "Here, safety means the guns are always loaded." "How comforting." Her tone carried a touch of irony. Austin looked at her for a few seconds, then moved to the desk. He set down a steaming cup of coffee. "For you. I remember you liked it black." Sarah stiffened slightly. "You remember, there are things one doesn't forget even after 20 years. His voice was quiet, heavy, each word falling like lead. She swallowed, forcing calm. "I don't recall that we ever met." "Long Island shore, summer of 2005. You laughed when I said I hated the waves." He said it simply, but each word peeled back a soft, warm fragment from the ashes of her past. Sarah studied his face harder. Older, but yes, she found it a trace of the boy he once was, fragile and far away. You're really Austin," he nodded. "The boy who couldn't swim but wanted to protect everyone." "That's me." Her lips parted. Her heart skipped a beat. How strange this man made her want both to believe and to run. A tense silence hung between them until Austin spoke again. Voice firm. "You should know your father didn't just owe money. He was involved in a bad trade with the Russians. I shut it down 5 years ago, but they still have copies of the files. They think you have them. Sarah frowned. I've never heard of such a thing. I believe you, but they don't care. To them, you're leverage. He pulled an envelope from a drawer and slid it toward her. I've had my people retrieve everything linked to your father to make sure no one else can use it against you. You and Leo will stay here until this is over. Stay here, yes. Here you're not hunted. Out there, you're prey. Sarah looked at the envelope, then back at him. And you expect me to trust a man who runs a killing empire? Austin tilted his head slightly. You don't need to trust me. Just survive. The calmness in his tone made her throat tighten. There was something about the way he said it, cold but not cruel, as if he'd lived his whole life speaking only one language: protection through violence. By noon, the Palmer estate smelled of wet grass. Leo was being escorted around the grounds, his eyes wide at the pond and the horses in the stable beyond. Sarah watched from afar, her chest torn between relief and unease. Leo didn't seem afraid of the men in black suits. He even chatted with them in his innocent curiosity. One of the guards, tall and composed, spoke to Leo, then turned to Sarah. I'm Marcus, Mr. Palmer's chief of security. The boy's bright. Sarah nodded, slightly smiling. Thank you. We're just trying to understand what's going on. Marcus smiled back, but there was a flicker of chill in his eyes. All you need to know is Mr. Palmer keeps his promises. The words were simple, yet something in them made Sarah's spine prickle. She realized that in this house, loyalty wasn't voluntary. It was like a golden chain, brilliant but unbreakable. Evening fell. Austin returned from a meeting silent, heading straight upstairs. He removed his jacket and poured himself a glass of whiskey. Passing by, Sarah saw the door ajar. She hesitated, then knocked gently. Come in, he said without looking up. What do you need? Nothing, she replied softly. I just wanted to say thank you for saving me. Austin looked up. His eyes met hers, sharp, direct enough to make her heart stutter. I didn't do it for gratitude. Then why? He set the glass down, leaning against the desk. The last light of sunset stained half his face, amber. Because I hate debts. What do you owe me? Nothing. I owe myself for being the 16-year-old boy who failed to keep a promise to protect someone. He smiled faintly. It hurt to look at. Sarah stepped closer, voice low. That boy doesn't exist anymore. Maybe not, he said, his tone barely above a whisper. But he still lives in me every time I see you. A silence as soft as smoke hung between them. Sarah faltered, ready to retreat, but his eyes held her still. I don't know how to thank you, she murmured. But when you look at me like that, I feel safe again. Austin closed his eyes, exhaling slowly as if suppressing something dangerous. Don't mistake it, Sarah. I'm not a good man. I only protect what I consider mine. When night fell, the mansion sank into heavy quiet. Sarah sat by the bed watching Leo sleep, her mind tangled. She wanted to leave, but there was nowhere left to go. She wanted to hate Austin, but each time she remembered his eyes, her heart softened. Outside light from the hallway slipped through the curtains. Austin hadn't gone to bed. He stood on the second-floor balcony, cigarette between his fingers. The smoke drifted into the wind, carrying the scent of dark wood. He looked down through the crack of a door below. He could see Sarah sitting beside her son. The stillness of that scene made him forget the sound of gunfire. Marcus appeared quietly behind him. Are you sure about this, boss? Keeping them here is trouble. The Russians won't stop. Austin narrowed his eyes. I know. Then why not hand them over to the police or someone else to guard them? Austin turned gaze sharp as a blade. Because if I don't protect them, no one will dare to. And I don't hand over what I've already touched. Marcus bowed slightly and left without another word. Austin stubbed out the cigarette, his eyes lingering on the window below. She doesn't know yet, he murmured, voice so low only he could hear, that her father's debt was one I bought. A gust of wind swept through. The night lay over the city like a dark silk veil. In its midst, a man burdened by his past was keeping a promise to his own darkness. And in that quiet room below, the woman he had saved, the one he once hurt, without knowing, slept in a peace he had paid for with blood. The New York night was thick as ink, dense enough to hear the city breathe. Inside the Palmer mansion, the lights still burned. Every beam of light was controlled. Every shadow watched. Sarah stood by the second-floor window, a cup of cold tea in her hand, eyes fixed on the fog-soaked garden below. Since setting foot in this house, she hadn't grown used to the feeling of being observed. Every step she took seemed to echo through the air, like whispers of secrets unspoken. Leo was asleep like any child after a long day. Only she could not rest. In her mind, the image of that man, Austin Palmer, kept surfacing clearer than the golden light around her. He had swept through her life like a storm, erasing both fear and faith. She owed him her life. But she feared the hand that had saved it. The door opened softly. No knock, no warning. Austin stepped in, still wearing a gray shirt collar, undone a glass of whiskey in his hand. The scent of liquor trailed him, mingling with the old wood in the air. "Can't sleep." His voice was low and rough, like night wind skimming a lake. Maybe because I'm not used to being locked in a kingpin's castle. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that shimmered like light on glass. "If I wanted to lock you up, you wouldn't be standing here. I'm only keeping you away from those who would kill you." Sarah turned her gaze sharp with quiet defiance. "Are you protecting me? Or keeping a promise to yourself?" Austin tilted his head slightly, eyes carrying something sad and cutting all at once. "You always speak half the truth and half something that makes people go silent." They were close enough now that she could hear the soft ripple of his drink. The light filtering through the curtain brushed his face across a faint scar on his cheek, old but striking like a mark destiny had carved there. Sarah's breath hitched, part fear, part something else entirely. "You once promised to protect me," she said softly, "when you were 16. Now you're doing it. But I don't know if it's kindness, or a way to redeem yourself." Austin set the glass down and said quietly, "Maybe both. But one thing I'm sure of, if anyone touches you again, they'll disappear." His words were calm, but they carried the weight of a death sentence. Sarah shivered. She couldn't tell if she feared his cruelty or that she believed him. The next morning, the mansion looked different. Sunlight poured across the stone walls. Guards in black rotated silently at their posts. Sarah and Leo were allowed into the garden. Amid the cold grandeur of the estate, she found one gentle corner, a rose garden, white and fragrant on the eastern side. Austin was there, sleeves rolled up, pruning the roses himself. The sight stopped her. The man who ruled a kingdom of blood now stood among flowers, focused and still like an artist. "You garden too?" she asked, half-teasing. Without looking up, he replied, "I plant things that can die to remind myself that everything has limits. Even power." She bent to look at a bloom just opening. "But you don't let anything die in your hands, do you?" "No," he said slowly. "I only keep what deserves to live." The air between them thickened. Sarah found it suddenly hard to breathe, not from fear, but from the rawness in his gaze. It was too real, too close, too dangerous. She stepped back abruptly and changed the subject. "Leo's started his online lessons. He loves your library." Austin's lips curved slightly. "The boy has his mother's eyes, and the stubbornness of a man I once knew." Sarah looked at him. "You mean my father?" He fell silent, eyes shifting away. The pause was brief, but long enough for her to sense it. Something in her gut whispered that Austin was hiding the truth about her father's death. That evening, a meeting took place in the basement, the heart of Austin's operations. Passing by, Sarah noticed the door ajar. Inside, Marcus's voice echoed, "Boss, the Russians are moving again. They're gathering men at the southern docks. If they strike, this house will be the first target." Austin's tone was even. "Let them think that. I have what they want." Marcus hesitated. "You mean—" Ms. Lawson Austin didn't answer at first. "Yes," he said finally. "And when they come, they'll meet hell." Sarah froze. "He's using me as bait," she thought, gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she backed away. That night, she didn't sleep. The mansion felt like a labyrinth, beautiful but woven from lies and secrets. The next morning, Austin left early. Word spread that he'd gone to the docks. Anxiety gnawed at her until she found herself standing before his private library, the one room she had been told never to enter. But curiosity was stronger than fear. The room smelled of old paper and tobacco. On the desk stood a silver-framed photo. She stepped closer. Her father, unmistakable, shaking hands with Austin at a formal event. The date engraved beneath 5 years ago. The year he vanished. Sarah's breath caught. Beneath the photo lay an unsigned contract to Charles Lawson, debt transfer to Palmer Holdings. She staggered back, heart-plunging. So the debt hadn't belonged to the Russians. It belonged to Austin Palmer. That afternoon, Austin returned dust on his jacket, a scrape across his cheek. Sarah waited by the stairs, eyes cold as steel. "You knew from the start." Austin stopped. He didn't pretend to be surprised. "You went into the library." "Yes, I saw the photo. And the contract." "You bought my father's debt." He was silent for a long moment, then said simply, "Yes. And you hid it from me." "Why?" "Because if you knew you'd leave, you think I don't have the right to know." He took a step closer, voice low and restrained. "I think you have nowhere else to go." The slap cracked through the hall's sharp final. Austin didn't flinch or strike back. He just looked at her, his eyes filled not with anger, but a cold sadness, like ice melting in the dark. "You made me grateful to the man who bought my father's soul," she whispered, trembling. "Do you know how sick that feels?" Austin nodded slowly, voice heavy as confession. "Yes, because I've been living with that sickness too." She turned away without another word and climbed the stairs. He stood there watching. When her shadow disappeared, Austin raised a hand to his cheek, still stinging, and closed his eyes. "I never meant to lie, Sarah," he murmured to the empty air. "I just didn't want to lose you, again." That night, Sarah sat by her window, watching the moon blur through the rain. Leo slept soundly, unaware of anything. In her mind, Austin's image returned the man who had saved her, sheltered her, and wrapped her in the sweetest lies. She didn't know whether to hate him or to ache for him. She only knew her heart had long betrayed her reason. Because amid ruin and doubt, all it took was his voice, and she felt safe again. Outside, Austin stood under the eaves, a cigarette between his fingers, one hand resting on the cold stone wall. Rain fell in steady lines, washing away the ash. He looked up toward the lit window where she sat. Even from a distance, his gaze carried something desperate, a quiet plea to be trusted just once more. But some wounds only deepen when light touches them. And that night, between two people who had once shared childhood and faith, only silence remained the only thing strong enough to hide everything else. The rain had fallen all night, as if the sky itself hesitated to let morning in. By dawn, the air inside the Palmer mansion was thick, heavier than the scent of coffee, and the smoke that still lingered in the parlor. Sarah hadn't seen Austin since their confrontation the night before. She avoided him like one avoids a fire that knows how to speak. Each time she heard his footsteps echo down the hall, she froze not out of fear, but because her heart still hadn't learned how to stay still when he was near. She knew too well emotions that live between pain and gratitude are the most dangerous kind. They make you want to flee and reach out at the same time. At noon, Leo came to the library where Austin was working. The boy carried a crumpled sheet of paper, a drawing of 3 figures, a man, a woman, and a child standing in the middle holding hands. Austin looked up. "What's that, kid?" Leo grinned, holding it up proudly. "Me, Mom, and you." Austin froze. For a moment, the entire world went still. Leo tilted his head, asking innocently, "Mom says everyone needs a family." "Do you have one?" A simple question, but it pierced like a blade. "No," Austin said quietly, eyes fixed on the drawing. "I have a house, but no one in it." "Well, now you do," Leo replied with the certainty of a child who didn't know how to lie. Austin chuckled, a rare sound, low and rough, but unexpectedly warm. He ruffled the boy's hair. "Thank you, Leo. I just hope someday you'll still say that, even after you know everything about me." Sarah stood by the door, watching, her chest tightening. In that moment, a different side of Austin appeared. Not the mafia boss, not the liar, but a lonely man hiding his wounds behind walls of stone. But she couldn't forgive him. Not yet, even though her heart already had. That afternoon, Sarah decided to leave the mansion, just for a while to breathe somewhere real with sunlight and wind. She didn't tell Austin. She simply asked Marcus, the bodyguard, to take her and Leo outside the city. Marcus agreed, though there was something colder than usual in his eyes. In the car, Sarah sat beside Leo, uneasy. She watched the scenery slide by streets. People life. The world was still moving, blissfully unaware of the secrets buried beneath the Palmer estate. When the car stopped by a small cafe, Leo ran to the ice cream shop next door. Sarah stayed by the window, smiling faintly as she watched him. Then she saw reflected in the glass a man sitting across the street watching her. Dark brown hair, sharp features. Not Austin. But there was something in his gaze that made her blood run cold, something familiar. He stood and walked toward her. "Excuse me, Ms. Lawson," Sarah stiffened. "Who are you?" "I worked with your father years ago," he said, his tone soft, but edged with something electric. "He told me if anything ever happened to find you. I need to speak to Mr. Palmer." Sarah glanced outside. Marcus was still by the car on the phone, not watching. "What do you want?" The man leaned in slightly. "Just one name. Valentine. Tell Palmer that name, he'll understand." Before she could respond, he turned and vanished into the crowd. Sarah's heart pounded. That name, Valentine, sounded like a curse wrapped in a single breath. On the drive back, she said nothing. She didn't dare. But the air in the car felt heavy with danger. That night when Austin returned, she went to him directly. He was in his study, unbuttoning his shirt collar, hair damp from the rain. "Do you know who Valentine is?" she asked. Austin froze. His eyes darkened instantly before he spun around to face her. "Where did you hear that name? I met a man today. He said my father was involved. And that you'd understand." The air thickened. Austin stepped closer, gripping her shoulders, his breath hot and sharp. "Where did you meet him?" "Who was with you, Marcus?" Austin's expression hardened. He released her and reached for his phone. "Bring Marcus here," he ordered. 10 minutes later, Marcus entered, calm, cold, unreadable. Austin's voice was quiet but edged like a blade. "Valentine's in New York. Did you know?" Marcus didn't answer. Then, slowly, "I thought you'd be glad to hear an old name again." "Old name?" Austin's mouth twisted. "Or a name you sold me to the air in the room shifted." Sarah took a step back, her chest tightening. Marcus still didn't flinch. "You've changed, Austin. You were never the kind of man to tear down your own empire for a woman." "Don't say another word." "No. Let me finish. She's making you weak. You're not the Palmer we followed anymore." Austin's hand clenched around the gun on the desk. His voice was low, hoarse. "So it was you sent the Russians my location last week?" Marcus gave a thin smile. "I didn't send them anything. I just left the door open." The gunshot cracked through the air, one single, clean, merciless sound. Marcus collapsed instantly, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as if trying to say something that never came. Sarah stepped back, trembling. Blood spread across the marble floor, dark and red like guilt incarnate. Austin set the gun down, silent. His shoulders shook slightly, but his eyes were steady, terrifyingly calm. When the guards had cleared the body, the mansion returned to its eerie quiet as if nothing had happened. Sarah sat on the sofa, gripping a glass of water. Her voice trembled. "You don't regret it?" Austin looked at her. "I forgave him twice. Both times he chose betrayal." "You killed someone who once called you his friend." "Yes, and he died the way he chose." His voice wasn't harsh or cold, just heavy, like grief wrapped in stone. Sarah stared at him and whispered, "Do you ever think you're killing a part of yourself? Each time you do this?" He said nothing, but in his eyes flickered something, exhaustion fleeting and raw before vanishing. Maybe he murmured, "But some parts have to die for the rest to survive." She rose, stepped closer. Under the soft golden light, his face was clear, weary, distant, achingly real. "Do you ever get tired, Austin?" He smiled faintly, barely. "All the time. But if I stop, someone dies. I don't get to be tired." She looked at him, then for the first time reached up and touched his face. "You do," she whispered. "You've just forgotten how." He didn't pull away, just closed his eyes. A single drop from her palm, or maybe the rain outside slid down his collar. That night, neither of them slept. Sarah sat by the bed, listening to the rain tapping the glass roof. Austin stood under the porch, alone in the dark. They both understood. From the moment that bullet was fired, everything between them had changed. It was no longer just debt or gratitude, but a thread invisible and binding, woven from truth blood, and an unnamed feeling born out of wounds that refused to heal. Somewhere in the night, thunder rolled in the distance. A flash of lightning split the sky, and for a brief instant, Sarah saw his silhouette etched against the wall. A man caught between light and shadow, unsure which side he belonged to. And she, heart-trembling, realized the most terrifying truth of all. Perhaps she no longer wanted him to leave the darkness. The next morning, the Palmer mansion was no longer quiet. Phones rang endlessly in Austin's office. Encrypted messages poured in without pause. All of them carried the same warning: the Russians were moving. Downstairs, Sarah sat by the window, staring out at the mist-covered garden. The sky was clear, but her heart was heavy with clouds. Since the night Marcus died, she hadn't been able to look at Austin the same way. He was no longer the man who had saved her life, nor the boy from Long Island she once knew. He was the man who held the lives of hundreds in his hands, including hers. Leo was in the library coloring happily. Sometimes he still asked about Uncle Austin, and all Sarah could do was smile faintly. But last night, when she saw Austin standing motionless under the rain, she'd realized something painful: she couldn't hate him, even though every part of her reason screamed that she should. Austin walked in, eyes tired, tie still loose around his neck. She turned away, but he had already seen her. "You're avoiding me," he said quietly, rough but without accusation. "No," she replied softly. "I'm just learning how to see you. As a real man, not a shadow of a promise." He paused, studying her, half sorrow, half surprise. "And what do you see?" Sarah smiled faintly, a smile tinged with bitterness. A man too busy chasing his past to live in his present. He didn't answer. He simply moved to the window beside her. The light fell across his face, gentle, but not strong enough to erase the darkness in his eyes. "You know," he said. After a long silence, "Sometimes I wish I could believe in something. Or someone." "You're talking to a psychologist, Austin," she said quietly. "I hear that every day." "And do they ever get saved?" She looked at him, her eyes tender. Sad. "No, because most of them don't really want to be." For a fleeting moment, a strange stillness filled the air. No past, no lies, no walls. Just two people standing side by side, finally daring to face themselves. That afternoon, Sarah went to the small medical room in the mansion, once belonging to Austin's mother, the housekeeper had said. The air was scented with pine and essential oils, light streaming through lace curtains. On the desk sat a pot of daisies freshly placed. Probably by him. Austin appeared soon after. He tapped lightly on the doorframe but didn't step in. "You're hurt," she said when she noticed the bandage on his arm. "It's nothing. Let me see." She didn't wait for permission. Just moved closer and carefully peeled the bandage away. The wound wasn't deep, but it burned raw. When she touched it, he flinched slightly. "You don't know how to take care of yourself," she murmured. "No one ever taught me." Her hands stilled. She looked up and met his gaze. There it was again, that restrained, broken look. "Sarah," he said hoarsely. "Do you know why I bought your father's debt?" She stayed silent. "Because I was afraid. Afraid they'd kill him if I didn't. And then he died anyway because of someone I trusted." He gave a bitter, breathless laugh. "I thought saving him would end it. But all I did was destroy you instead." Sarah's chest tightened. She had never seen Austin like this, not weak in strength but in soul. "You didn't destroy me," she said softly. "You just taught me how to hurt. For a reason that had a face." His gray eyes trembled. "You don't know how many times I've regretted it." "I do," she whispered. "Because if you didn't, you wouldn't look at me the way you do." That night, Leo went to bed early. Sarah stepped into the garden. The night wind stirred through the rows of white roses, their petals bending, as if listening. Austin was already there in a black coat, standing between the flowers. She hadn't meant to go to him yet. Somehow her feet carried her forward. "You should sleep," he said without turning. And you, I've never known how. She stopped beside him silent for a while. What are you afraid of, Austin? I'm afraid of losing you again. But I'm also afraid that if I keep you, I'll ruin you. She smiled faintly. You sound like a tragic man from a love story. Maybe he said, eyes locking onto hers. But I never knew what this feeling was, until you came back. She exhaled, closing her eyes. You can't love through fear, Austin. It suffocates the other person. Then what should I do? Let go. The word let go has never existed in my language. His words made her laugh, a soft, trembling laugh caught between tears. You know, Austin, she said gently, I used to think you could only destroy. But it turns out you can heal too. You just haven't learned how to do it without hurting someone. He turned to her, then his gaze so deep she almost stopped breathing. Then teach me, he whispered. Sarah looked at him, her heart racing like it did the first time they met. She knew she should step back, keep the distance. But in that moment, reason and emotion dissolved like mist. She whispered, You can't teach someone how to love, Austin. You can only learn it together from the start. He leaned in. His lips brushed hers. Light, tentative trembling, a question without words. Everything else disappeared the wind the night the world itself. Only them, two broken souls finding fragments of themselves in each other. After the kiss, Sarah turned away silent. Austin didn't stop her. He simply looked at his hand, the one she had touched, and clenched it as if to hold on to the feeling a little longer. Above them, the moon hung like a silver scar. And in the garden below, two shadows, one belonging to a man who had chosen the dark, the other to a woman who once fled from it, now merged into one. But the next morning, when Sarah woke, Austin was gone. On the table lay a folded note written in the familiar, strong hand. I have to leave before they arrive. If I don't come back, don't look for me. Believe that everything I've done was to keep you and your son alive. A. She read it over and over, then folded it carefully, pressing it against her chest. No tears, just a silence so deep it felt like the sea after a storm calm, endless and empty. Outside, the sound of an engine faded into the distance. Austin Palmer. The man who once made the world bow was now leaving it behind like a shadow at dawn. And he didn't know that in that very moment, the woman he left behind had finally begun to love him. New York wore a silvery gray coat in the early days of winter. Morning mist clung quietly to the windows, and the streets stood still as if holding a secret. In the upstairs room of the Palmer mansion, Sarah sat by the desk. Hands clasped, eyes fixed outside, waiting for something she couldn't name. It had been 3 days since Austin left. 3 long days that stretched like 3 seasons, silent, heavy, and slow, until even the ticking of the clock began to frighten her. The house, once full of people, now carried a strange kind of quiet. Franco Austin's most trusted guard remained to ensure their safety. But from his eyes, Sarah could tell something was happening out there. She tried to focus on teaching Leo reading, tending to the garden. But every night she dreamed the same dream Austin in walking away. His figure swallowed by the dark, and she never managed to call out in time. That afternoon, Franco knocked on the library door, his voice low. Ms. Lawson, we need to talk. Sarah looked up wary. Do you have news about Austin? Franco avoided her gaze. He's down south dealing with an old faction of the organization. But that's not why I came. Then what is it someone's breached the security system? They know you and Leo are here. The air in the room changed immediately. Sarah stood up sharply. You mean the Russians? Maybe Franco said quietly. Or someone else. But Mr. Palmer ordered that if this ever happened, I'm to get you and Leo out immediately. Sarah shook her head. No, I'm not leaving while he's still out there. Franco's eyes softened with pity. He knew you'd say that. That's why he told me not to ask your permission. Ask. That night, Franco prepared the car to leave the city. But when everything was ready, Sarah was gone. Instead, she left a handwritten note on the table. If Austin comes back, tell him I'm done running. I want to know what he's been hiding. Franco read it, exhaled heavily, and didn't report it. He simply looked toward the eastern hill where the faint lights of the old Palmer house still glowed. Sarah was there. The old house sat on a rise about a mile from the main estate, the place where Austin had grown up. He once told her, "Everything begins and ends here." Sarah pushed the creaking door open. Inside, dust lay thick. The air was soaked with the smell of damp wood and old gunpowder. On the wall hung family photos. Austin as a boy, already wearing that same solemn gaze. On the desk sat a leather notebook. She opened it. The first line stopped her cold. "The day my father died. I learned this to protect you must sometimes become cruel. But who protects the one who chooses cruelty?" She turned the pages. Notes about transactions, organizations, even the name Valentine circled in bold red ink. At the bottom, a half-finished line. "Sarah will never forgive me if she learns the truth about her father." Her knees buckled. Austin hadn't hidden the truth to protect his power, but to protect her. Because Charles Lawson, her father, had once run a money laundering branch for the Palmer Syndicate. He wasn't a victim. He was part of the system Austin was born to destroy. And his death had not been an accident. A faint sound came from the doorway. Sarah turned. Franco stood there, his face grave. "You shouldn't be reading that," he said. "You knew all along, didn't you?" she whispered. He hesitated, then nodded. "I did. And I knew you'd hate him if you found out." Sarah rose to her feet, gripping the notebook tightly. Her voice trembled, but cold. "I don't hate him. I just need the truth. If Austin killed my father, I want to hear it from him." She didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Austin returned. The sound of tires on gravel, the creak of the front door. The house came alive again with his presence. He entered, coat dusted with dirt hair, wind-tossed, eyes hollow with exhaustion, and wary calm. Sarah stood at the base of the stairs, notebook in hand. When their eyes met, neither spoke at first. "Austin," she said quietly. "I know." He froze. "About what, my father? And the real reason you kept me here?" He was silent for a long time, then slowly removed his gloves. "I was going to tell you, just not yet." "It's never yet with you, is it?" she said bitterly, tears spilling. "You always wait until it's too late." He stepped closer, eyes clouded with remorse. "Your father was a good man, in his own way. But he was also the one laundering Bratva's money. When I found out, I begged them to spare him. But Valentine refused. If I hadn't killed him, they would have destroyed my family." Sarah's voice broke. "So you chose him instead of fighting back?" "I chose you," he whispered. "I kept you alive." A silence stretched between them, sharp, unbearable. She stared at him, then asked, voice like the edge of a blade, "And you think I can live peacefully with that?" She moved to walk past him, but Austin grabbed her hand. "Sarah, you don't understand. From the moment I saw you again, I only had one choice: to protect you or let you hate me. I chose the second as long as you're still breathing." "You don't understand, Austin," she said, choking back tears. "I don't need a protector. I need someone who's honest." He was silent, his gaze burning like fire trapped in ice. "Honest," he repeated, voice low. "Then here's the truth. I didn't save you out of duty. I saved you because I couldn't bear losing you again." She froze. "You're saying that to make me forgive you." "No," he said softly. "I'm saying it because it's all I have left. I'm not a good man, Sarah, but I love you the only way I know how, with blood, with guilt, and with silence." Sarah broke. Tears streamed down her face, falling onto his hands. "You love me, but you killed the man I loved. How can that kind of love not be stained?" He looked at her, voice hoarse. "Maybe it's not clean, but it's real." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the white roses blur under falling snow. Outside, the world was silent, too silent for a beating heart. Austin entered quietly. "I'm leaving," he said. "Valentine knows where we are. If I stay, it puts you and Leo in danger." She looked up, weary. "How long will you keep running, Austin?" "All your life." He didn't answer. He just reached out and took her hand. "I don't want to lose you, but if leaving is the only way to keep you alive, I'll do it." Her voice softened, but her words cut deep. You've spent your whole life sacrificing yourself for others, but you never ask if they want you to. He leaned closer, whispering, "What do you want, Sarah?" She didn't answer right away. After a long pause, she whispered, "I want you to stop running, to believe that there can be a world where you don't have to kill to be loved." He gave a small, broken laugh. "That world doesn't exist." "Then we'll build it," she said. They stood there, surrounded by the chill of snow and the weight of fear. Austin bowed his head, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "You have no idea how dangerous those words are," he murmured, his breath warm in the cold air. "I know," Sarah whispered back, trembling. "But maybe the most dangerous thing is saying nothing." The door swung open. Wind rushed in, carrying the first snow of winter. Outside in the far distance, a line of black cars appeared on the horizon, heading their way. Valentine had arrived, and the storm Austin had feared for years had finally returned, bringing with it everything he'd tried to bury: the past, the guilt, and a love that had never been fully spoken. Spring returned to New York. On the rain-damp avenues, steam rose like soft mist, wrapping gently around budding trees. The city seemed to breathe again after long months of exhaustion, as if everyone was learning how to begin anew, including Isabella Reed. She was no longer a journalist, nor the woman in the Whitestone investigation that the media once mentioned. Now she lived in a small apartment near Central Park, teaching creative writing to young students in the mornings and working on her novel at night. Her new book was titled The Man Who Vanished Twice, a story about a man once guilty of terrible things who chose to disappear so that the truth could live on. No one knew it was based on a true story, except for her and the man who once walked the fragile line between darkness and redemption. That afternoon, as Isabella was editing her manuscript, the doorbell rang. A small parcel sat on her doorstep. No return address, just a note to Ms. Reed. Inside was a small wooden box, simple and unadorned. When she lifted the lid, the scent of sandalwood filled the air. Resting within it was a silver key engraved with the words, "For what was left unsaid." No address, no letter, just the key. But Isabella knew only one man had ever spoken in such language. She held the key up to the light. It caught the sun spilling through the window, gleaming like a silent promise. Underneath the box was a thin, damp-stained paper, a map. At the bottom, one word was written, Venice, Italy. Spring in Venice was veiled in mist. The air smelled of salt and coffee and oars sliced gently through narrow canals. Isabella stepped off the train at Santa Lucia, her small suitcase rolling behind her. She didn't ask anyone for directions, didn't tell anyone she was coming. Everything felt preordained, like a play she was only meant to walk into on cue. The hotel was tucked inside the old district walls, painted in fading reds and golds, moss clinging to the window frames. The receptionist handed her a key, saying softly, "Room 204. The gentleman who reserved it asked me to tell you that." When she opened the door, a faint trace of cologne wood and smoke lingered in the air. On the table sat a leather notebook beside a cup of espresso still warm. On the first page, written in a familiar slanted hand, "If you've come this far, it means I was right. Truth doesn't die when people fall silent. It only changes its form." His voice seemed to echo in her head, deep, steady, with that familiar blend of irony and warmth. She sat down and turned the pages. Inside were handwritten notes, not a journal, but a confession. Henry wrote of his early years with Sullivan Group, of the contracts he'd signed, without reading of the first time he realized Whitestone didn't save people, it bought them. Every sentence felt like a cut, and yet within those words she found what she'd once believed in his humanity. He had written, "I once thought justice could be measured by power. Now I know justice exists only when we accept the cost of losing everything we once held." Isabella smiled faintly as tears blurred the ink. At the bottom of the page, the last line bled into the paper. "And if you're reading this, believe me, I never truly left." Rain fell softly over Venice. Isabella walked along the Rialto Bridge, where lights shimmered on the canal like scattered stars. A street musician played Nessun Dorma on a violin, each note rising and trembling with aching beauty. She stopped to listen and looked up. On the rooftop of a building across the canal, a tall man in a black coat leaned against the railing. From this distance, she couldn't see his face, but she didn't need to. The tilt of his head, the shape of his shoulders. Henry. Her breath caught. Logic hesitated, but her heart knew first. He didn't look down. He simply turned away, stepping back inside as if he'd never been there at all. Isabella let her umbrella fall and ran across the bridge through the puddles, her dress soaked as strangers turned to stare. When she reached the building, the stairway to the roof stood open. She climbed quickly, her heartbeat matching the rain. The door creaked open. No one. Only wind sweeping through the open terrace and a note pinned beneath a wet stone. Half of it was blurred by rain, but she could still read. Some meetings exist only to remind us that we once found each other, and that is enough. She sank to her knees, clutching the paper to her chest. This time she didn't cry, because she knew he was alive, and this was how he chose to exist between being seen and never being touched. Months later, Isabella left Venice. She carried the notebook and the silver key with her, her only keepsakes. Back in New York, she was no longer the woman who ran from the world. She founded a small organization, the Reed Foundation, helping victims once controlled by Whitestone rebuild their lives. When people asked about it, she always smiled and said, "I'm just continuing a story someone else began." And in her modest office hung a single white canvas blank, except for one faint line written across it. Justice isn't punishment. It's choosing to stand in the light even once. One late afternoon, as golden light spilled across her desk, another parcel arrived. Inside was a photograph Venice from above. The canals glittered under a sunset sky, and in the corner of the frame, a lone figure stood at the edge of a bridge, back turned to the camera. On the back, a short message: light doesn't always fall on the most deserving, but on those brave enough to believe it still exists. No signature, none needed. She placed the photo beside her coffee and whispered, "I still believe, Henry." 5 years later, a summer morning in Central Park. Children laughed and chased pigeons near the Bethesda fountain. Isabella sat on her usual bench, sunlight dappled on her hands. A man took the seat opposite her and handed her a folded newspaper. When she looked up, she caught her breath. It wasn't Henry, but the eyes were hauntingly familiar. He smiled, his voice carrying a soft Italian lilt. He said, "If you were still here every morning, I should give you this." She unfolded the paper. At the bottom corner of the international section was a small article of fire in southern Italy. A secret facility belonging to the remnants of the Whitestone network had been destroyed. No survivors. But among the ruins, investigators found a single iron plaque engraved with the words, "Truth never dies." She looked up, but the man was gone. Only a gentle breeze passed, carrying the scent of jasmine and children's laughter. That night, Isabella returned home. She opened her window to the glowing skyline, the city lights blurring like stars. On the desk, the silver key still gleamed faint, steady, eternal. She picked it up, holding it close, and whispered, "You may be far away, but in this small corner of light you still exist." A gust of wind rustled through the curtains, turning the pages of the old notebook he had left behind. The final page opened a single line written in blue ink. "If there's another life, I'd like to be the one who makes your morning coffee." Isabella smiled through tears. Outside, dawn began to rise, painting the sky with shades of rose and gold. She placed the note back inside, whispering softly as if to a soul that was still listening, "And I'll wake early every day to wait for you." Sunlight streamed through the window, glinting off the notebook, the silver key, and the old photograph. On the wall, her shadow stretched long, merging with the new day's light. Somewhere, perhaps in the mist of Venice or beyond the sea, Henry Sullivan was still alive in memory. In truth, in a love that could never be undone. And in that light, Isabella closed her eyes and smiled, as if at last they had both found a place without a name, only each other. 3 months later, the snow was gone. New York emerged in the soft colors of spring, as if there had never been blood or gunfire. The Palmer estate slowly reopened. The men in black suits, once ruled by fear, began to look at one another differently, with the hesitant gaze of people who had finally been allowed to hope. On the top floor, the room once called the Strategy Chamber had a new name, the Light Room. Sarah had chosen it. Austin said nothing, only looked at her for a long moment before nodding. He was still weak, but his eyes had changed. Gone was the coldness of a crime lord, replaced by the calm of a man who had faced the abyss and chosen to return. Sarah sat across from him, reviewing files, making notes, sometimes glancing up, only to find his gaze already there. And every time her heart skipped not from fear, but from peace. One morning, the doctor allowed Austin to take a walk outside. He chose the white rose garden, the one that had once been stained with his blood, now blooming with impossible grace. Sarah walked beside him, holding his coat wrapped in the quiet tenderness of two people who had once lost each other. "Do you remember the first time I stood here?" she asked. "I do. You hated me so much you couldn't even look at me. And now?" "Now?" He smiled faintly. "Now you still hate me. But it's the kind of hate that won't let you leave." Austin laughed rough low, but real. He bent down, cut a rose, and carefully stripped its thorns before handing it to her. "I planted these to remind myself that beauty can still hurt. But you taught me that pain isn't always something to fear." Sarah looked at the rose in her hand, her eyes softening. "You've changed, Austin." "No," he said quietly. "I just stopped running from myself." That evening, the three of them had dinner together. Leo had grown so attached to Austin that he sat right on his lap, animatedly talking about his dream of becoming a pilot. Austin listened intently, his expression lighting up with each word from the boy. After dinner, Leo ran off to watch cartoons, and Sarah began clearing the table. Austin stayed seated, his eyes wandering around the kitchen. "I used to think this house was a fortress," he murmured. "Now I realize it was just a cage until you and Leo walked in." "You don't have to say that." "I do, because I've never said anything so true before." Sarah turned toward him, smiling, the kind of smile that no longer hid caution, only trust. That night, Sarah stood by the bedroom window, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. Austin came up behind her, draping a coat over her shoulders. "I'm still not used to someone touching me," he said softly, "but you do it so naturally that I forget what fear feels like." She turned, half teasing. "Is that a thank you or a warning?" "Both." The lamplight reflected in his eyes, eyes that had once held storms, but now glowed with quiet light. Sarah looked up at him and whispered, "Do you know what I'm most afraid of? What that someday you'll forget. This gentleness and become who you were before." Austin froze, then took her hand, his voice deliberate and steady. "If that ever happens, remind me. By kissing me. Because only you can make me remember I once knew how to love." The next day, the Palmer Foundation was officially launched, a charity supporting children orphaned by underground wars. It bore Austin's name, but Sarah was the one running it. The press conference was small, attended only by trusted journalists, but to them, it felt like the most important morning of their lives. As he signed the charter, Austin paused and looked at Sarah. "I don't believe in redemption," he said quietly, "but maybe this is the closest I'll ever come to touching it." Sarah placed her hand over his. "It's not redemption," she said. "It's a beginning." Camera shutters clicked, flashes burst, and in that split second, the man who had once made an entire city tremble looked warm, almost human again. For a moment, the past dissolved. That night after the ceremony, they sat together on the rooftop. The city sprawled below them, glowing in rivers of light. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder and asked softly, "Do you still think about my father?" Austin was silent for a while before answering. "Every day, but not out of guilt anymore, out of gratitude. Because he left me something he never got the chance to keep." "What's that?" "You." She didn't reply, just tightened her grip around his hand. Above them, the first spring fireworks burst into the night sky. Light spilled across their faces, two people once consumed by darkness, now sitting beneath a brightness they no longer had to ask permission to exist in. But life was never a fairy tale. One night, Austin received an urgent call. Franco's voice trembled slightly on the line. "Valentine. He's alive. He lost his memory, but someone's hiding him." Sarah overheard. She stepped closer, meeting Austin's eyes. No fear, no hesitation. "You're going, aren't you? I have to be sure. And if everything starts again, then I'll still choose to protect you." She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Then this time, I'm coming with you." Austin looked up, startled. "No, Sarah, I can't put you in danger." "You don't understand," she said, her eyes burning bright. I'm not going to save you. I'm going to remind you that you're not alone. He stared at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. All right, but if things get out of hand, then I'll kiss you to make you remember. Her words made him laugh, a rare, honest laugh that sounded like breathing again. 3 days later, they left the city. The car rolled south past forests of tall pines swaying like unspoken memories. Sarah sat beside him, her hand resting over his, both of them silent. Outside, dawn began to rise, pale but steady, just like them. Before they left, Franco had given Sarah a small photograph, the three of them, in the rose garden. Sarah, Leo, and Austin, smiling under a sun-drenched sky. On the back, Franco had written, "No one is born a hero or a sinner. Only those who dare to walk through darkness ever find their way home." Sarah slipped the photo into her coat pocket and looked ahead. Outside, the road stretched endlessly into the light. And in that moment, she understood life didn't need a perfect ending. It only needed the courage to begin again, in a light that no longer asked for permission. The southern pine forest was silent in the early morning, a veil of mist draped like silk. The black car stopped along a dirt road where only the sound of wind brushing through the trees could be heard. Austin stepped out, his long coat swaying in the breeze, his gaze distant, quiet, yet deep. Sarah followed, wearing a fitted sweater, her hand still clutching a worn piece of paper. The note Austin had written the night he first left. "If I don't come back, don't look for me. But if you still believe I will return." She never imagined that after everything she would be the one following him into this path, where the line between good and evil was as thin as a breath. They stopped before an abandoned cabin on the forest's edge. Franco had reported traces of Valentin here. The air was thick with the metallic scent of gun oil and dust. Inside, everything was in disarray, except for a single photograph on the wall, Austin and Valentin, 20 years younger in black military uniforms. Beneath it, a handwritten line, "One holds the light, one holds the dark." Sarah whispered, "Do you really think he's still alive?" "I don't think," Austin replied, his voice low. "I know." He brushed a hand against the frame, his eyes shadowed by something unnamed, grief, perhaps. For a friend who had lost his soul, they didn't have to wait long. The crunch of tires on gravel echoed outside. An SUV pulled in. The door opened and a man stepped out. No mask. Valentin recognized Austin immediately. His face was gaunt, but his eyes were unchanged, sharp cold, and unbearably sad. "You came," Valentin rasped. "I knew you couldn't let the past rest." "The past never rests," Austin replied quietly. "Not until we face it." Valentin looked at Sarah and gave a thin smile. "She's the reason you're still alive, isn't she?" "How ironic. We all die for the ones we love." Sarah didn't flinch. "No one dies for love," she said calmly. "They die because they're too afraid to keep it." Valentin laughed, a hollow, broken sound. Then he drew his gun. "Courage, huh? Let's see who's got more of it." Gunfire shattered the dawn. Austin shoved Sarah aside and charged forward, the muzzle flash slicing through the pale morning light. It was over in seconds, 2 shots a fall, then silence. Valentin collapsed, still gripping his gun, eyes glassy but lucid. "Seems you won," he murmured. Austin shook his head, voice trembling. "No, we both lost, because we forgot why we began." Valentin's lips curved faintly before he went still. Sarah rushed to Austin's side, blood seeping through his shoulder. "I'm fine," he whispered with a weak smile. "I promised you this time I'd come back." She pressed her hand to his cheek, tears spilling down. "And you did." 3 weeks later, the Palmer Foundation held a memorial for those who had fallen. No media, no noise, just the faces of people who had once lived in darkness, now standing together to watch the sunrise. Sarah stood at the podium, her voice soft but unwavering. "We can't erase the past, but we can choose how to tell it, not with fear, but with hope. An empire built on blood must now be sustained by compassion." From the front row, Austin watched her pride glinting in his eyes, the kind of pride he'd never known how to feel. When sunlight streamed through the glass behind her, his face softened, peaceful no longer, the man who once made cities tremble. After the ceremony, Sarah and Leo walked through the new wing of the foundation. Children's drawings lined the walls, bright, chaotic, full of laughter. Leo ran ahead, shouting, "Mom, Uncle Austin." "Look, I drew our family." He held up a picture. 3 figures hand in hand beneath a golden sun. Austin chuckled. "You made me too tall. That's 'cause you're a hero." Leo grinned. Sarah looked at him and said softly, "You hear that?" Hero Austin smiled faintly. "I'm just a man who learned to fear losing what matters." She squeezed his hand. "That's what real courage looks like." As dusk fell, they returned to the white rose garden, once soaked in blood, now touched only by wind. Austin sat on a stone bench, his eyes distant. "I used to think I'd never live a normal life," he said. "But maybe normal was what I'd been searching for all along." Sarah sat beside him, placing her hand over his. "There's nothing normal about us, Austin. But maybe that's what makes us real." He looked at her, those same deep eyes as the first day they met, but this time unguarded. "You know, Sarah," he murmured, "there's something I never told you." "What is it?" "The day you walked back into my life, I knew no matter how it ended, I'd still choose you." She smiled through trembling lips. "And if there's another life, I won't lose you again." They sat in silence. Among the white roses, the sunset blazed radiant and tender, like the final breath of an old story. 1 year later, the Palmer Foundation opened its first branch in Africa. Sarah led the humanitarian team with Austin beside her, not as a benefactor, but as a man learning how to give without taking. That first night in the foreign land, as children sang under the moon, Austin leaned close and whispered, "I never thought light could come from the darkest places." Sarah rested her head against his shoulder. "That's because light doesn't ask permission, Austin. It only needs someone brave enough to open the door." He looked at her gently. "And you were the one who opened mine." She didn't reply, only tightened her hand around his. The children's voices rose in harmony, echoing through the fields. Moonlight spilled over them, soft, pure, and real. Months later, the headlines read, "The Palmer Group officially transfers all profits to social welfare foundations." CEO Austin Palmer declares, "Power means nothing unless it's used to heal." Sarah smiled as she read it. She hadn't realized that the man beside her, once called a monster, was now rewriting what it meant to be human. That evening, they returned to New York. By the Hudson River, where she had first seen him again, the wind was calm and cool. Sarah leaned against his shoulder and asked, "If you could rewrite it all, what would you change?" Austin was silent for a moment, then said, "Nothing. Every mistake brought me here to you." She laughed softly, tears glimmering in her eyes. In the distance, the sunset burned crimson, like a wound finally closed, glowing on the surface of the river. A story doesn't end when every wound is healed, but when you can touch the scars without fear. Sarah understood that. Austin did too. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was real, like sunlight spilling through a window after a storm. And in the end, only one truth remained. Love doesn't save the world, but it reminds us that the world is still worth saving. If this story moved your heart even for a moment, share it. Because sometimes all it takes is one small story to remind someone. The light is still there, waiting to be called by its name.